In episode 2, unfortunately for Jamie, he gets kicked off the hit show Lust Conquers All. The next day, they're contractually obligated to go on a TV show, talk about the experience of getting kicked off. And Jamie's kind of enemy number one with a lot of people because he made one girl feel like he was going to get married to her, and then he slept with another girl in a jacuzzi. And you just don't do that on a show called Lust Conquers All. Now, Jamie actually left Man City to be on this show. He figures, yeah, I can just go back to Man City if Pep Guardiola will have me back. But they won't. They have no interest. Jamie goes to meet with his agent afterwards, and he finds out that it's not just Man City that doesn't have any interest. Nobody has any interest. In fact, the only interest in Jamie Tart is another kind of reality show where you go to Ibiza and take ecstasy for 3 weeks. And Jamie just can't believe that his agent can't find him any team that is willing to take him. Jamie Tart suddenly has become a rudderless ship. And it's kind of similar with Roy Kent without football. His big plans for the day are to do yoga and cook Keely dinner. It's a far cry from being a pro soccer player. He drops Keely off where he ends up seeing Ted for the first time in a while, but when Ted goes to say hi to him, Roy just takes off, and Keely has to tell Ted he's having a busy day. As Keely and Ted are talking, they see Dr. Fieldstone come into the office on this fancy bike. And Ted's a little taken aback to see her because he thought that the team was getting rid of her. She was only supposed to be there for a couple days after all. But that's when Keely tells him Higgins hired her for the rest of the season. He goes in to confront Higgins about it, and Higgins does apologize and says, I should have confronted you first, but Ted says, nah, man, you're head of football operations. You don't have to ask me for my opinion. Ted ends up bullying Higgins into standing up for himself. As he's sitting there, though, he notices a familiar smell in the building. And when he brings it up, Nate runs in and says, wait till you hear this shit. We'll put lavender in the laundry detergent. Yeah, that's right, Ted. He put a calming influence in the laundry detergent. It just seems like no matter what Will does, Nate's going to have an issue with it. Although, in defense, it seems like he kind of has a case with this one. After getting the drama of the office, Ted heads upstairs to welcome Dr. Fieldstone, the same way that he welcomed Rebecca. He brings her biscuits. He bursts in the doorway just like he normally would with anybody, but she reprimands him for it, saying, please don't do that. I could have been in a session. And that kind of takes Ted off guard a little bit. He offers her the biscuits, and at first she says no, but she eventually takes a bite of one. But then she hands him back, saying, thanks, Ted, but I don't eat sugar. In a past life, when I would eat sugar, I would talk nonsense for an hour and then pass out. Ted explains that he's the same way with video games. It's something in his life he really enjoys, and he pretends that somehow not having it is better for him. But in reality, he's just depriving himself of something that makes him happy. Instead of attempting to adjust your relationship to it. He then excitedly sits down and asks her, what's your favorite book? But instead of answering the question, she says, this is very interesting. This is clearly your way of connecting with people. It's very disarming. And then right before she kicks him out, she says, I'd really like to observe training today, which Ted says, yeah, you're welcome anytime. But Ted is completely thrown off by this woman. He can't read her at all. Ted then heads upstairs to see Rebecca, who's setting up a new online dating profile with the help of Keely. And when he hands her the box of biscuits, she's a little appalled to see that there's a bite taken out of one. And Ted explains how he gave her biscuits away to Dr. Fieldstone, but Fieldstone doesn't eat sugar. And Rebecca's response to that is, what a fucking asshole. They then get into a conversation about how you don't really need therapy. That's what you have friends for. But then they proceed to prove why you do need a therapist because neither of them want to admit what's going on in their personal lives to each other. Fast forward to later in the day, Roy Kent didn't just have yoga and dinner plans. It was trophy ceremony day for his girls' soccer team. And after hammering home to the girls that they should be feeling like shit because they lost, he heads home to find Keely jerking off. And initially, he's really turned on. He wants to know what gets her going. And that's when she reluctantly shows him. She's not jerking off to porn. She's not wanking it to the royal wedding. We're not talking the latest issue of Good Housekeeping. She's getting off to Roy Kent's retirement ceremony. And it is as bad as he said. He's a blubbering mess in it. And Roy gets pretty insulted. He can't believe that she's getting off to him being, quote, pathetic. But she says, no, you're vulnerable. And you haven't been like that since you left football. He tries to explain how at his age, with a messed up knee, you don't get to be a football player. And that's when she once again brings up the analyst job that he turned down. She tells him you'd be back around the game again. And I know you miss it, but he still is pretty steadfast that he doesn't want to do it. And that's when she really hits below the belt, saying, you're just like Jamie. And this didn't come out of the blue. Keely ran into Jamie that day. Jamie had nowhere else to go. He needed to talk to somebody about what was going on in his career, and Keely was always really good at listening. So he hunted her down in a coffee shop, and the two chatted it up. And it turns out that with nowhere else to go, Jamie wants to come back to Richmond. Keely explains that while Jamie is really lost, at least he's trying to find his way back to the game. Roy, he's content with yoga moms. Eventually, he reluctantly gives in. He will do one episode on the analyst role, but when it doesn't work out, he vows to hire a bunch of little kids to follow her around for eternity and scream, "Told you so, told you so, told you so." That's a trade-off that she's willing to make. As Keely and Roy were negotiating, Ted is sitting alone in the pub having dinner when the other lost soccer player, Jamie Tart, walks in. Ted invites him to sit down and says, "What can I help you with?" And that's when Jamie asks, "What are the odds of me coming back and playing with Richmond?" And Ted explains, "Jamie, you burned a lot of bridges over there. Let me ask you a question. Why did you leave Man City and go on that show? You were getting good minutes." And at first, Jamie toes the company line, saying, "I thought it would be fun. I thought it would boost my brand." But Ted knows that's a lie. And eventually the real reason comes out. Jamie went on that show and quit Man City because of his dad. Jamie got sick of his dad criticizing every little thing he did on the pitch, so he decided to piss him off by going on the show. Ted tells Jamie that sometimes an overbearing dad is what drives men to be great. Bono's dad was apparently a piece of work, but then again, so was Joshua Tree. When there's a little bit of awkward silence, Jamie once again asks him, "So, what do you say? Can I come back?" And Ted turns to him and tells him, "Jamie, you're an amazing player, but I just don't think it's a good idea." The problem is, though, unbeknownst to Ted, the supporters down in the bar ended up taking pictures of the encounter. The pictures end up hitting social media, so when the Richmond players show up the next morning, they assume that Jamie's coming back on the team. And as Ted told Jamie, he burned a lot of bridges, so that doesn't sit well with the players. When Ted comes out on the pitch, Beard lets him know that it's a little contentious today. As if Ted wasn't already stressed out because Fieldstone is right behind him watching his every move. When he tries to correct Sam on his passing, Sam ends up flipping out at him, initially telling him he could do better, but then storming off the pitch. Ted has to go chasing after him, but before he enters the locker room, he makes sure to let Fieldstone know he's not usually like this. He finally catches up to Sam and says, "All right, man, what is it? It's pretty clear that you have something going on." And after some prodding, Sam says, "I can't believe you're bringing Jamie back to the team. I mean, how many locker room blowups have we had since Jamie left? None? I mean, yeah, we haven't won yet, but we will. I believe that. Just because Jamie scores goals does not mean he deserves to be here." All of this, by the way, catches Ted completely off guard. He had no idea that the picture was circulating on Twitter. Sam then goes on to tell Ted that no player has ever made me feel as bad about myself as Jamie Tart did. Ted tells Sam, "Look, I understand you're upset with him," but Sam cuts him off and says, "No, I'm not upset with him. I'm upset with you. You didn't even talk to us about it." And Ted says, "Honestly, I didn't think there was anything to talk about. I told Jamie it's not going to happen." And that completely changes Sam's mood. Sam feels pretty awkward and apologizes to Ted, but Ted says, "Sam, don't worry about it. You're a leader on this team. I want you to speak your mind." Sam gets a big smile and thanks Ted and then says, "My father tells me every time he sees you on TV, he's very happy that I am here. He says I'm in safe hands with you." Ted thanks him, but then he makes him run a bunch of laps for storming off the pitch. But it wasn't just Ted and Sam that were talking, because over in the corner, Higgins had set up shop in the weight room. He gave his office to Dr. Fieldstone, and he never got it back, so he's kind of a man without a home. So after practice, Ted invites Higgins downstairs to join the Diamond Dogs, where he belongs. Ted then tells the group, "We need to discuss the future of Jamie Tart with this team," and Beard's a little surprised because he thought that topic was dead. And it was, until Sam reminded Ted that not everybody's as lucky as Sam to have a great dad. Higgins does say that Jamie could be exactly what they need, but Nate points out that it could also ruin morale. They put it to a vote, and the only person in favor of bringing back Jamie is Higgins. So it seems like it's settled. Jamie's not coming back. As Ted leaves the office that night, he runs into Dr. Fieldstone, and she thanks him for inviting her to practice. She tells him that she'll email his staff her takeaways when she gets home, but he says, "No, go ahead, give it to me right now. What do you got?" So she tells him that there's a wonderful atmosphere at Richmond. All the employees are thoughtful and kind, and they actually listen to one another. He then asks her, "So do you think we have like a if it ain't broke, don't fix it situation?" And she reminds him, "You have 8 straight ties. Heavy is the head that wears the visor. You probably have a lot on your mind, and I hope one day we get to sit down and talk about it." And Fieldstone was right. Ted does have a lot on his mind. He does need to shake things up in a way. So the next day, as the team's warming up on the pitch before practice, out walks Jamie Tart. And then finally, there's Roy's big tryout. He's not looking forward to it. He doesn't want to do it. He's working with guys that when he played against them, he couldn't stand. But he shines. They start breaking down a Chelsea United game, and most of the pundits are pretty vanilla with their analysis. And then they get to Roy Kent, who is brutally honest. He says that his old team Chelsea played like shit. I mean, it's exactly what you'd want from Roy Kent as an analyst. It takes his coworkers completely off guard, but the audience loves it. The reaction on social media is great. And when he gets home, Sky Sports reaches out to Keely and tells her, "We want Roy back, we just have to clean up the salty language a little bit." And Roy admits, yeah, it was good to be back near the game. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. Once again, thank you for checking out this recap.